This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra.
Thank you again for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast. Today's episode is a part of a two-part series on the 2012 movie Prometheus from Ridley Scott. In this episode, Chris makes his case for how this was a great movie. He lays out why he thinks this movie is a classic of the genre and makes a number of important points. In our next episode, Eric Fogg, a many-time guest of the show, is going to make the opposite argument. You don't have to listen to either episode in any particular order, but I definitely think you should listen to both of them to get some really unique and interesting perspectives, and we would definitely love to hear your perspective. So if you have some thoughts about this movie, definitely send them in, and we will probably do an episode to address those points of yours. A great way to support Beyond the Big Screen podcast is to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. These reviews really help me know what you think of the show and help other people learn about Beyond the Big Screen. You can learn more about Beyond the Big Screen yourself, great movies and stories so great they should be movies, on Facebook and Twitter by searching for A2Z History. You can contact me there or just send an email to my email address, steve@a2zhistorypage.com. Links to all of this and more can be found at beyondthebigscreen.com. I thank you for joining me again, Beyond the Big Screen. Thank you for joining us again on Beyond the Big Screen. I'm Steve. Today, I'm really happy to be joined by an old friend, Chris, who is a burgeoning podcaster. And we've gotten to talking about this movie, Prometheus. And it's a 2002 movie by Ridley Scott. Now, the purpose of that, there's going to be two episodes. Chris is a huge supporter and loves this movie, and I'm going to talk with another good friend of ours who you're well acquainted with. He does not love this movie as much, so we're going to kind of leave the thinking to you. I'm going to discuss this movie with Chris. I'm going to discuss this movie with Eric, and you'll get two really different perspectives on the movie. Now, what I would suggest is there's going to be spoilers, always spoilers on Beyond the Big Screen. But so what I would highly suggest is you listen to this podcast, listen to Chris's take, listen to Eric's take, watch the movie, or watch the movie, listen to the podcasts, then watch the movie again, or any combination thereof. It's totally up to you. This is a very, very deep movie. Just to really basically set this movie up, it stars Guy Pearce, Charlize Theron, Idris Elba, Michael Fassbender, Noomi Race, and many others. And it's a prequel to the Alien series. Now, I can see people starting to get a little question about the Alien series. Hang in here with us. Now, this episode, it's not a debate. We're not saying whether you should like the movie or you should hate the movie. What we're saying is you're going to get two really different views on the movie. Now, to maybe get started off, Chris, what do you like about this movie, and why do you think that it's an important movie to talk about?
Open it up. I guess one of the reasons I like the movie is it's so grandiose in what it tries to do. And I'll talk about, some of the stuff and maybe it fails a little bit at, but just to open it up, the opening sequence of the movie is this beautiful shot of this, landscape basically that hasn't been touched by humans, right? And then it cuts to an alien. Basically, we find out later in the movie that they're called engineers. And it's the way the whole thing is set up. It almost has a bunch of it almost has a religious undertone to the entire thing. He's taking off this robe to reveal that he's basically reached the pinnacle of whatever his race is capable of. He looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then he opens this black vial. It's in a cup kind of, and he drinks it. And then you soon see that his body starts disintegrating, and then the camera cuts to you see literally his DNA breaking apart, and then he falls into the water because it's all taking place like right around a waterfall. And then it cuts to, you see the DNA reforming in the water, basically kind of indicating like this engineer self-sacrificed himself to spark life on this planet. It's not necessarily made 100% clear whether this planet is Earth or not, but I don't know, to me it makes more sense just to think about it like it's Earth, right? And yeah, like the way the whole thing is filmed is just it's just beautifully filmed. Like I've never really seen like a film tackle the a combination of science and religious symbolism quite like Prometheus had. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that first scene, because it leaves us, we know there's something going on with the DNA. They're floating that out there, and well, it's literally floating in the water. And I think that you're definitely supposed to think that this blue guy is seeding this planet, which we presume is Earth.
Yeah,
that he's seeding it with his DNA, and what that vial is. I think that opening scene is probably really, for me, the most powerful scene in the whole movie, because I think it leaves you with so many questions and it makes you excited to watch the rest.
There's also another aspect to it too. Like, I don't know how scientifically inclined your audience is, but like there's different scientific theories of it's called panspermia, and there's directed panspermia and there's indirected panspermia. Now, indirected panspermia means the theory goes that a meteorite or a chunk of another planet hit Earth and it contained like the basic elements of carbon matter that eventually turned into like DNA was on it, and it hit Earth. And this is what kind of like kickstarted the whole thing, right? Like Darwin talks about this in terms of I believe, if I'm remembering it correctly, it's the Cambrian explosion. And it's something that Darwin's theory couldn't fully explain, where like all of a sudden all this life starts popping out real quickly and really fast, which goes against what Darwin's theory of like how it's a slow, gradual process. He couldn't really explain this. I don't think he's ever explained it. And it might be above my pay grade, but I don't think any person has really kind of explained this explosion sufficiently. I'm sure there's good theories out there. And then there's the theory of directed panspermia, where potentially like superior alien races, actually this is what they do. Like they seed other planets, and that it's directed, right? So it's not just like a random event. And there used to be like a lot of I'm sure many of them probably wouldn't speak openly about it now, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe at one point Carl Sagan did believe this to a certain degree, that he believed that at one point, like before humans were here, that aliens might have visited planet Earth or whatever, right? And this whole like opening sequence, like it's taking the sort of ancient alien theory, right? I know that gets a bad rap because of the goofballs on the television, right? It's taking it somewhat seriously, in my opinion. And it's beautifully shot, and it opens up like all different types of questions. How did we start as a species, right? Like, were we given a kickstart? I know 2001 Space Odyssey touches on this too, right? In terms of this movie, it's very direct. Like the engineers did give us a kickstart.
And I don't think we have to take any of these theories too seriously, and that this is science fiction. So it's taking science and playing with it. So it's not like, we either of us or anybody has to subscribe to panspermia directly, indirectly, or anything. That's kind of what it's implied in is, in this world, there was this event. The
reason that the opening sequence works so well is, I guess, because I kind of come from like reading a fair amount about both those different types of theories, and then it was just, it just grabbed me right away as soon as I saw it, right? It was like, oh, this is like the best version of like directed panspermia I've ever seen in a movie.
after that initial scene, then they move into, I think, the next key scene that these two scenes really set up the whole movie is that there's a couple of archaeologists, the main character and her boyfriend. I don't know if they're boyfriend or girlfriend at that point, but her and her partner will say they discover like some petroglyphs and hieroglyphs, and they kind of put all that stuff together. And what do they determine?
Shaw is the female lead. She's like the main lead in the movie. Her boyfriend, I can't remember his name right off the top of my head.
I should say that it's started at the title says that it's in 2089, so the somewhat not too distant future.
Yeah, and they're archaeologists, and I guess you see I believe it's in a mountain in Scotland or a cave in Scotland, and you see like a ancient petroglyph. It could have been maybe carved in by ancient people, and it shows like a giant man pointing towards a star system. And what we find out later in the movie is they found this same star system in ancient art from archaeology, like evidence that they found from all over the world. And they find out that apparently, using the star system or what have you, that this place actually does exist, and it actually has a planet that's very much could potentially be Earth-like. So it's almost like the engineers are pointing them to go to this star system. And this is like where it becomes more like an ancient alien type theory.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. Yeah, so I think that sets us up. So they see that that star system, and with their modern, or futuristic technology, they're able to determine that that's an actual star system. They also have interstellar travel figured out by that point as well. So a trillionaire, I think he's literally a trillionaire, played by Guy Pearce, and he's the president of the Wayland Corporation, which ties back into the Aliens franchise. He sets off an expedition to this planet system to find out what's going on. He sets off this expedition to the planet. We don't know 100% what his reasoning is, or there's certainly reasoning underneath the surface as well. But so they set off on an expedition that's been funded by Peter Whalen, almost like an Elon Musk style, to go discover what's going on and that planet. So it's not something done by, say, the government or the military. It's a private company that's doing this investigation, which I kind of presume, or we have to presume, that Wayland is almost like the government at this point. Yeah,
that's interesting. I never even really thought about it like that too much. Like it seemed Peter Whalen reminds me of like if Jeff Bezos was even like more powerful than he was, and decided, like, I happen to believe that the human species comes from these like ancient aliens. It's like, these people believe that they've found it, and there is a solar system out there, and he just decided to fund it, right? But it is interesting in the sense of like what's going on right now. Like Jeff Bezos is firing his own rockets. Elon Musk is doing it too.
Is his name Richard Branson, the guy from Virgin Galactic?
Yeah. Well, Elon Musk did his thing with it was like a government contract, I believe, and he said he could build the rockets at like a fraction of the cost than what NASA was building them at, and he did it. They work. So it's not made entirely, like it's made at this point in the movie. Peter Whalen seems like the type of guy, like he legitimately wants to find, like, where did humanity come from? I think like another important aspect of that scene too is that you find like like Shaw's like introducing the mission to the rest of the crew at the time after they get introduced to Peter Whalen, and they ask her like, well, why do you believe that there's going to be anything there? And she says, because I choose to, right? The Shaw's religious beliefs, I believe, play like a really important part in her important part of her character and her drive to find exactly who these engineers are.
There is that scene that we skipped over a little bit, but there's as they're on this intergalactic travel from Earth to this planetary system, all of the humans are in a suspended state of animation, and there's a robot, David, and that's played by Michael Fassbender. He's taking care of everything on the ship, and he's preparing himself as well for eventually, if they do bump into the aliens or the makers of, if you will, the people who they feel are in this system.
Yeah, he's actually studying, I believe. I remember reading somewhere he's actually studying like Indo-European, Indo-Aryan,
ancient language.
Yeah, like the root of like all the languages, with the, I guess the belief being, I mean, it's a jump of faith, right? But like that's the oldest language we have. They probably maybe understand this, right? So like, it's, you gotta, it is a sci-fi movie, right? So you gotta, take a couple leap of faith. The interesting part of that scene too, and this is like another huge part of this movie that I find really fascinating, is Wayland is introducing David as like the synthetic AI, as you said, right? Like he's introducing the mission to the rest of the crew, and then he's introducing David, and he talks about David like David is the son that he never had. He mentions at the end that David doesn't possess a soul, and you see the look on David's face like, well, what's that supposed to mean? You can see like he's starting to feel resentment, and it becomes more important as the movie goes on.
And then we actually do find out that he does have a child, and it's Charlize Theron.
Yeah,
who looks very similar to David. That the way they're kind of done up.
Yeah, well, it's like Wayland's a really, like, I'm sure many people who are that rich in real life he's a really weird dude. He's more proud of his synthetic creation than he is of his like actual organic creation, right? Which is it's interesting, right? Because in a lot of ways David is superior to humanity in many ways, right? Like he can live forever, right? He just can keep on going. He doesn't have to sleep. He thinks more rationally and logically. Like basically all the drawbacks of humanity, David doesn't have any of these, right? He's, in a sense, he's almost like a superior creation, right? And that becomes more important as the movie goes on, in my opinion, because I think David slowly starts realizing that conclusion himself. Why I don't really need these humans. I'm superior to them.
This is where the movie, I think it's starting to, I wouldn't say fail, but it's taking on a lot of themes in a movie that's not that long. It's a 2-hour long movie. We're talking about alien contact. We're talking about where evolution starts from. We're talking about artificial intelligence, the Ubermensch. We've got like 4 or 5 big themes going on here. Plus, it's also an aliens movie, so it has almost a sci-fi horror element built into it too.
The biggest complaint about Prometheus that I get from a lot of people is they say, well, it's not an alien movie, and I'd be like, well, yeah, I agree with you. It's not. It's like it's something else. It's something like else entirely, in my opinion, right? And it might have, like you pointed out, I think it might have been a little bit better if they focused on like 2 of those issues, maybe just like David and the engineers, and that's it. Where they could have just left David out, to be honest, and just focused on the engineers. But I quite like the David part of it, and I think it's a pretty big part. But it's just like you pointed out, it's only a 2-hour movie, right? So it's hard. It's like you having so many ideas come at you at once. To me, I think it requires multiple viewings to really like fully appreciate it. It's not just a movie you can just like watch once and then that's it.
Yeah, I think watching it, I watched it a second time, and I may even watch it a third time. you definitely start picking out, like I'm even thinking of certain things right now, like the black goo. I don't know, did they call it something else in the movie? I think we've been calling it the black goo.
It's just referred to like as the black goo. That's what I've called it.
The black goo that the engineer in the very beginning, he drinks it, and it kind of, that's what like splits him apart. They find jugs and jugs and jugs of this black goo when they finally get to the planet, and they go into this cave system where the ancient alien technology is. And they don't actually see it. None of the characters see it, but swimming in and about this goo is little, like almost worms or larvae.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about it, and I'm wondering if the engineers, they planted that goo there, not even knowing it, but that the goo got somehow infested by some sort of native creature to this planet, and that's adding in another theme of what happens with creation. You can't control creation, and I think that's maybe the biggest theme of all of this is once you've created something, it's really ultimately not under your control anymore.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because it's very true, and then it also ties back into like the religious themes of the movie. Like God created Adam and Eve, and then immediately what did we do? We just didn't listen to what God did, and we went off and did our own thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's Waylon creates David, and then what does David do at the end of the movie? He's like, I don't want to listen to these people anymore. You know, the engineers create humanity, and then it's never made clear in the movie. Well, it's made clear in the movie later on that the engineers were trying to come back to Earth to wipe us out. Basically, like they helped create humans, and then they're like, "Oh my God, we screwed up. Like we got to fix this problem." Yeah, it's like we pointed out, like the problem of creation. Like you create something, and it's almost like you lose control of that creation. It's almost like parenting in a sense, right? Like once a child, like you have a child, and up into a certain age, once they reach a certain age, they slowly stop listening, right? And then you kind of lose control of something that you created.
Even parents who come in their mind that, oh, my kid's going to be a star baseball player, and you feed everything's baseball. You put them in every baseball camp on earth, and then suddenly they turn 14 and, oh, I'm never going to pick up a baseball again in my life. And that creation and that plan that you've made completely falls apart. But I think about David. He's a robot. He's a computer, a mechanical device, essentially, of anything that could ever be created. What should be more meant to just fulfill what its creator's intention was. And even that's not under control. David has his own sentience.
Yeah, because for David to function, he would have to have semi-independent intelligence, right? He obviously has full independent intelligence, right? Because he has to be able to make decisions on his own. Especially like when you mentioned when they were in the cryo sleep on the ship, David has to be able to adjust to like problems that happen on the ship on the fly. And that goes back to like the old, like kind of the old Christian creation story, right? Like we believe that human beings were endowed with free will. God gave us that right off the bat, right? Because he knew that we needed it. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. And if something has free will, it can contradict and conflict with its creator.
But this, to me, is what's so fascinating about the movie. Like here, we're talking about the Old Testament. We're talking about like parenting. We're talking about the nature of creation itself. And on the surface, this is supposed to be like a B sci-fi movie that takes place in the alien universe, but it's not. It's way more than that. Not many movies can start these kind of conversations, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that after talking about it with you, I mean, we talked a lot about it off microphone. I mean, over the course of weeks, we've talked about it. I think that that's maybe it's a failing of the movie, is that it's so ambitious and it has to get fit inside of the Aliens universe, which in a lot of ways, we've gone back and forth about this. The Aliens universe has in a lot of ways gone in not the maybe in the more it's gone into a little bit of a cheesier direction and a little lighter sci-fi with like Aliens versus Predator and that sort of thing. It's moved out of like hard sci-fi. And it's I don't know if Ridley Scott was trying to reboot it into a more philosophical direction or what, but he still had to make an Aliens movie.
Yeah, he still had to fit it in. Yeah, he still had to somewhat fit it into that universe. Like, my personal opinion, like the first 3 Alien movies are like, a lot of people didn't like the third one. I mean, well, maybe one day we'll talk about that later, but definitely the first 3, in my opinion, are some of the best B sci-fi movies, like sci-fi horror movies made. And they were made by top quality guys too. Ridley Scott, James Cameron, David Fincher. Like, they're beautifully made, but at their core, it's a horror film that takes place on a spaceship.
Yeah.
Whereas like Prometheus is trying to be a lot more than just that.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. I'd say the other issue that I had with it, and I'd like to see what you think. I never got a sense of what we're really supposed to think about the engineers, because there was at this compound on this alien planet, there was, I think, 4 or 5 engineers that had gone into their own version of cryostasis, and all of them died except for one. And then they awaken the one, David awakens the last one who's alive, and he just basically goes nuts when he leaves the cryo chamber. And what do you think? What are we supposed to think about that, in your opinion?
Well, I think when they landed on this planet, I think we find out later just how devastating the black goo is on this. It like immediately transforms everything around it, turns it into like a killing organism, right? It's like the worst virus on the planet. So yeah, I think they were bringing this stuff to this planet and to like weaponize it, right? So they could use it, so they can send it to Earth, right? But they didn't want to do it on their home planet because they know how deadly this stuff is. Think about it like kind of like nuclear, like a nuclear bomb type thing. Like, ideally, you want it to be as far away from people as possible when you're just trying to figure out how to use this, right? Which is kind of what we did when we were testing these nuclear bombs, right? They just happened to have a chance to go to another planet. And I think it's not made clear in the movie, which I guess is one of the failings in the movies. Like, you've talked about this, where there's a little bit too much ambiguity about exactly what happened, and it leaves a little bit too many questions. But I believe either some of this black goo got out, like it was like an accident, or potentially maybe some of the engineers found out what some of the other engineers were going to do and did not want it to happen, and it led to a bunch of them dying. Or it could have been, like I said, like there was an accident with the black goo and it killed all of them except for this one. I don't know. What do you think?
If we tie it back to the Prometheus story that we know, if that first guy in that very first scene, what if he is like the Prometheus? He knows what this goo has, what it can actually do with seeding the planet. So maybe he is one of these, whatever this alien race is, he's actually going rogue when he does that. And the rest of whatever this alien group is, they feel like at this point we have to destroy what he's done, because it's potential that once humans know how to get into outer space, that they're competition.
Yeah, that could be potentially it too, right? Like, I've always kind of thought that like they just kind of saw how humanity was evolving. Because we find out later that one of the engineers we find out in the movie that they test one of the engineers and they find out that it's 2,000 years old, right? Mm-hmm. So they must have been observing what was going on the planet, and they just kind of saw like, oh, this is the direction they're going. Well, we might as well end them now before they can travel into like outer space, right? But I think your theory works just as well too. Like, and it's one of the failings of the movie, I'll admit, is it would have been nice if it was at least a little bit more clear exactly like why the engineers wanted to destroy humanity, you know? But even Shaw's left with that question too, right? At the very end of the movie, she's like, I'm jumping ahead, but she's like, I want to know the answer. You know, it's just much like the audience. Like, why did they want to do this? But I believe your theory is very good too.
Then I think that that opens up the question of who left these. Where did it come from with humanity, where they find in all these different civilizations? I think they had shown in a montage, it was that first cave they found in Scotland, and there was one in Egypt or something, and then somewhere else that's that symbol of the planets. And then you got to ask yourself, was that baked into our DNA? Or was that sort of something that the engineers were planting in our ancient cultures as sort of a trap to go to this planet later, to kind of like suck us into a trap? And I think that ambiguity that they leave there, it's more than just not satisfying. I think it leaves a hole in the story.
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, I've always just kind of interpreted it as like the engineer's DNA is baked into us, and it comes forth in symbolic thinking, because we do find out later that our DNA is 100% a match with the engineers they tested in a lab, right?
Yeah.
But like you said, like it would have been nicer if they had made that part a little more clearer, right? I believe the plan was to eventually, I think it was to do at least 2 films or a series of films taking place in this Prometheus universe, and it just never got made, right? Because a lot of Alien fans were upset with Prometheus.
There was one made in not too long after this that was a prequel to this movie.
Oh, you're talking Alien Covenant. It's a sequel to this one.
Oh, okay.
But it's much more like a traditional kind of Alien film.
Oh, so it really doesn't answer any questions.
No, it answers a couple, but not in the way I think a lot of people that were fans of the Prometheus universe probably wanted. You know, I can say I was a little bit disappointed in the film. I think the film's good because it expands on David's character, but yeah, it was I would have done it differently, but maybe the studio told Ridley Scott, it's like, well, if you want to make this movie, we want it more like an Alien movie. Otherwise, you're not going to get the money for it. So, I mean, that's how the studio system works. It kind of stinks that way, but you know, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here, right? So,
yeah, I think that's probably one of the things that we can boil it down to is, I mean, we could ask for a perfect sci-fi movie that gives us like the philosophical things that we want, but there's chance that there's major commercial necessities that have to be done in a movie like this.
Yeah. And one of the lines that gets to me is David is talking to Shaw's boyfriend, and they're talking about like at this point they don't know that there's not an engineer alive. They believe that they're all dead, and David, they're going back and forth or what have you, and David asks Shaw's boyfriend, you know, well, why did you guys make me, like speaking of humanity? And Shaw's boyfriend is, because we could. And then David responds, well, imagine if that was the answer that you got. And it's as crazy as it's like, it is like a very like deep, like profound question. So it has kind of like nihilistic kind of undertones to it, in the sense of like, is that something that we as humanity could handle? Like, like say we meet like our creator, whether like it be God or like ancient alien or what have you, and we ask, why'd you do it? And that's like the person's response is, well, because we could. It was the same. It would be the same thing with if eventually we'll get to the point where we can create AI. I'm not saying that's anytime soon, but that will probably be the answer we'll have to give them. It's because we could. That's simple as that. There's no deeper meaning to it.
Or is it a worse answer? We're creating you so that you can do stuff for us.
Basically, yeah. Like it's you could, well, in that scene in particular, you start seeing that David, he purposely affects Shaw's boyfriend with the black goo, and you start seeing, firsthand that he's basically resentful of humanity, right?
Yeah, when Shaw's boyfriend, he gets infected with it, and I think he becomes like monstrous. And I tried to find something, something deeper, like a connection, and I think that was just like a cool monster scene.
Yeah, it was like, yeah, kind of like how the black goo changes them. That is actually one of my complaints about the movie is we understand that like the black goo, at least on the planet, it's very like inconsistent, like exactly what it does and doesn't do. It gets, I don't know, like at one moment it's like turning worms into like these giant like snake things, and then Shaw's boyfriend kind of turns into like this monster sort of, and I would have liked it like the black goo does this to you, right? It just seems like it's very random what it does.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely one of the weaknesses. I think they either call it a MacGuffin. It's sort of like a plot device that it can be used however they need it to be used to just keep the plot moving forward. And I think that was ultimately the weakness in this movie, is that they had all this cool stuff going on that could have been really drawn out. Any one or two of those themes put together, you could have drawn it out, made a really interesting sci-fi movie, and still made a good aliens movie. But when you put all of it together, it's kind of like Thanksgiving dinner, when any one of those things, you eat it and you'd feel good and you'd be satisfied at the end of the meal. You have all of it together, and then you're laid out on the couch for the whole rest of the night. Yeah, I think it was just too many themes that had to get fit into this certain element. And then there's just I think with that aliens, there's just a lot of like, I'm struggling to come up with the right word, kind of like the cheesiness, like the captain of the ship, Yannick, played by Idris Elba. He's like such a cool character, but he's too cool. And Charlize Theron, they're too cool. And I think that sets the wrong tone. Like all of the characters, they just didn't act quite right for the situation that they were in.
Yeah, that was one of my complaints is I really liked how Shaw's character was played and her boyfriend, because they seem like she seems realistic. Like, but a lot of like the supporting cast, like I find like the scientists are pretty silly. And the captain of the ship we barely get to know the guy, really. We see him a bit, and then I don't know. I would have liked them to have spent a little bit more time on his character, and I would have liked to have learned more about Charlize Theron's character and her relationship with her dad. But we're talking, and then we're also like we're fitting that more into the movie, right? Like it's just there's so much going on. It's certain things shine really well in the movie, and things that do shine really well, I think, shine incredibly well. But a lot of it gets lost, like we've pointed out. Like there's just so much going on in the movie.
There's another theme too, with they had set up a little bit with Shaw and her dad. Her dad's played by Patrick Wilson, so another huge name. They set up kind of a thing there of like parent-child with Charlize Theron and Guy Pearce, and with Shaw and her dad. And, like we've been saying this whole time, like creator created. But again, they just don't. I think if you get down to brass tacks, it's being too ambitious, but I think they never really set things up enough in the beginning so that we have context to really make sense of the conclusions that they want to draw.
Yeah, it's good. The viewer is, I believe it, like, in my opinion, it's dependent upon the viewer to like draw those conclusions out, right? Like, I think to a degree that we have, minus maybe a couple things here and there. Like, to me, it's not an easy movie for the viewer, right? Like, requires multiple viewings, right? And like actually asking these questions in your head, right? But that's most people who want to go see like a movie. This is, I believe, one of the reasons why the movie was not well received at the time, is like people want to go see an alien movie. They don't want to think too much.
It wasn't successful as just like a straight up alien movie either.
Yeah.
I don't think that there was maybe a few scenes that had some suspense to them, but they weren't really like, if you were going into it and you just wanted to see like a fun like space horror movie, it didn't carry that one through either. You had to sit through a lot of the things that we've been talking about to get to a couple of decent fight scenes or like aliens fighting each other scenes.
Yeah, there's the more like kind of traditional. I think the best part of blending in the more traditional alien horror motifs is like the C-section that Shaw has to go through. We find out later that Shaw is pregnant, but she had previously made love with her boyfriend, who at the time had been infected with the black goo, and she's pregnant with an alien. And she has to go to one of these pods, which is, I guess it's like a robot, like surgeon pod, and like override it, and has to like perform a C-section on herself to get the alien out. It's not for the squeamish. So if you people out there listening don't like blood and stuff like that, I wouldn't. Like, it's really intense. Like, it's probably like one of my favorite scenes that they did in like the Alien universe. But it, like you said, it's something like it almost feels like it's shoehorned in, because it's like, especially near the end of the movie, we got to fit this alien stuff in here too, right?
Yeah, and I think that's another one that we could maybe draw the conclusion. David is the one, I think we said that, or you said that David injected Shaw's boyfriend with the goo. They have relations, and then Shaw's like instantly pregnant. I think David said she's like 4 months pregnant or 3 months pregnant in regular human terms, but it's it's an alien monster in there. And David, that's one thing with him. He's very like flippant and detached from all of this, but you can also see that he's getting a glee from it as well.
Yeah, he's in a sense like sadistic, right? Like he's looking at the crew, and he's looking at the rest of humanity, and it's like he looks at them like the way that like he doesn't care, like in the sense of like how we would squish a bug, right? Like these people are like beneath me, he's having fun doing it, right?
So maybe to wrap up today, I think there's two things that I think would be a good way to wrap this up, and one is, what's your in a elevator speech to tell someone, go see this movie and this is why you'll enjoy it?
My sales pitch about Prometheus is, well, for one, if you go see this movie and pay attention to the big themes of the movie and what it's trying to tackle, and see how like and think to yourself, like, how successful is it in terms of like tackling some of these big issues? Like, in my opinion, I believe it does it really well. The big issues that it's talking about, like in terms of the origins of life, creation, purpose, the God, like how does God fit into all of this, right? The science behind it, and try to not focus on some of the stuff that me and Steve have talked about in some terms of the problems of the movie, and the fact that like it tries to fit in too much in too small of a space. There's some inconsistencies. It's not a perfect movie, but in a sense, appreciate the just how far it tried to shoot. Like it tried to be like this movie that tackled the problem of creation. How many movies in Hollywood have legitimately tried to tackle that issue? There hasn't been many, and I appreciate it because it does so many things so well, and I appreciate that, like, in the modern age, that a film like this could get made, especially considering it seems like the only thing that ever gets put out nowadays is, you know, some new Cape movie. Here's a movie that's trying to tackle timeless issues, and yes, it might fail in some aspects, but in other aspects, it whacks it right out of the park, and it releases the imagination in people. It released the imagination in me personally, and I believe it will do to a lot of other people, and it will leave you asking a lot of questions, which I believe is a good thing.